When you try to search as to who designed the lighthouse, you will always hear this one name, Sostratus of Cnidus, and most of the time you will see that he's the architect and that's that. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you will see that there is more to him than we might expect. Let me introduce you to Lucian of Samosata, who in my opinion is the George Carlin of the ancient world. I mean, they even look alike. He writes an essay called How to Write History, and in this essay he talks about all the fake historians, the ones that change the narrative to their interest, sucking up the leaders and emperors like a lollipop, trying to get money or something else out of it. He doesn't only call them bootlickers, he also makes fun of them. Actually, kind of like a stand-up show too. And he finishes with how history should be written and shares an interesting story. Apparently, Sostratus couldn't write his name on Pharos to dedicate it to himself because Ptolemy didn't allow it. He wanted the dedication and the fame all to himself. But Sostratus wasn't gonna have it, so he plays the long game instead. He writes his name on Pharos first, and then he covers it with plaster. And only then he writes the name of the reigning king, because he knew, as it actually happened, that the plaster would fade away with time, revealing the true architect. Now, the modern ideas take this as apocryphal, which means it's probably not reliably sourced, or it could even be made up, only to ensure his point that history should be written that looks to the future and does not become a prisoner of praise and fame. Now, my question is, how can someone who makes fun of all these fake historians make a story up and tell it as real? But there is also another side to this coin. Pliny says, the generous spirit shown by King Ptolemy, whereby he allowed the name of the architect to be inscribed on the very fabric of the building. Through his close friendship and his dedication, his name could be seen on Pharos. Let's hold on a second, because this coin might land upright. So, like I mentioned, Sostratus was close with royalty. And in some sources that I have read, it is stated that Pharos was the only wonder that was constructed and financed by a private citizen. That private citizen is our one and only Sostratus, of course. But like I mentioned in a previous video, Pharos costed 800 talents. It might not seem like much, but it's 23 or even more tons worth of silver. Also the 10th of the royal treasury when Ptolemy I assumed the throne. Now that is a huge sum. And this source from James Grout, also linked to the University of Chicago, has a very interesting take. It says that this is a good reason to assume that Sostratus only financed the statue on top and not the whole of the lighthouse. And he might not even be the architect himself. Strabo describes him as this: a friend of the kings, a wealthy courtier and envoy of the Ptolemies. So he could be this rich, influenced man who was also a bigwig, according to some source, which is a funny word that I learned, that got his way into being remembered as the architect himself. Okay, what do you think? Which one do you think makes the most amount of sense? And also, there's another thing about Lucian that kind of reduces his credibility. We'll get to that later. Okay, now that I mentioned the statue, let's get into details, because it's one hell of a thing. Historically speaking, we have three different theories about who crowned the lighthouse. And the first one comes from Posidippus of Pella. He said that at night, a sailor could see a great fire blazing from its summit and not miss Zeus' Soter. Now, Soter is an epithet, by the way, that can be given to gods, kings, etc. And it means savior, which this savior could sometimes be linked to Ptolemy I and his wife, Berenice, I think. And the second one is Poseidon, because in some descriptions, he appears out of nowhere with his trident, without much or actually any explanation as to why. And lastly, we have Helios, from modern archaeologists like Judith Mackenzie, may she rest in peace, from this mosaic here. Andrew Michael Chugg, an independent researcher, also mentions Alexander Helios, looking through gems, coins, and the obvious effect of Alexander the Great. We can hardly be sure of anything, which makes me really super mad sometimes. But Kent Trethway, the father of pharology, the study of lighthouses, rather concluded this confusion. He said, why not both? It could at first be Zeus' Soter, and then, when it was modified and changed, it could be changed into Helios. Which makes a lot of sense, because we have varying reports and varying sources about what exactly crowned the lighthouse. Now, during the making of Assassin's Creed Origins, Ubisoft looked through this chaos, and they saw the bigger picture. They chose Serapis. Now let me tell you why this is an amazing and a magnificent choice. Serapis didn't come from myths, legends, or poems. He was created for the purpose of one thing. Let's go back to the time when Alexandria itself was found. When Alexander the Great had this complete control over Egypt, he had so long dreamt of this amazing city, where Greeks, Macedonians, and Egyptians could live together in harmony, and of course, name it after himself. And during the foundation of the city, they had to use flour instead of chalk, because they just didn't have chalk. And after some time of hard work, birds of all kinds appear out of nowhere, and they come and devour every pinch of flour. At first, Alexander himself is afraid of this, thinking that this could be a bad omen. But soon after, his priests, his augurs, came to him and say, "This is the best news we can have, because this not only means the city will have everything it needs in abundance," this is a keyword, don't forget it, "but will also feed many other nations as well. And now, the city that can feed everyone must have a god to also represent them." This is what the Ptolemies must have thought. I'm assuming this round table like King Arthur's, where they sat and decided, okay, we will take the soul of Egypt and then put it into a Greek mold. And by soul of Egypt, I mean Osiris and Apis. And so many gods are associated with him, but his name seems to be coming from those two. And so he had the face of Zeus and the heart of Egypt, uniting both of the worlds. And a teeny tiny detail. What does he have on his head? A kalathos. What do you think it symbolizes? Abundance. I mean, it's such an amazing play. If they did this knowingly, oh my god, it's amazing. But I have some bad news. No one or nothing in history mentions anything about Serapis crowning the lighthouse. And to be honest, I wish someone did. And you know, Ubisoft is alright with this since it's only historical fiction. Also, I learned many things about Serapis. Let me know if you want me to talk about it. Its design and its stages. Everything we know about this look comes from this man, Herman Tierk. I'm sorry for pronouncing it wrong. And not just the look itself too. He is the foundation himself. Now, I can bore you with 5 phases in detail, or you can go and read Ken Trethway or Herman Tierk himself. They are the masters. I cannot explain like they do. And Trethway looks into each phases, leaving his commentaries. There's also another theory as for the phases by Michael Dennis Higgins in this book. He gives us 3 different phases, and they are completely different from what we are used to. And to be honest, the first phase he introduced made a lot of sense to me at first, because how do we know the Lighthouse of Alexandria? Yes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But here's the catch. It wasn't always on the list. Let's look at the first and original list by Antipater of Sidon. And it makes a lot of sense that a simple structure with a fire on top doesn't make it to the major leagues, as they were known by their scale and not their practicality. So, when did it get its VIP pass? 1540. A man named Pedro Mexia writes a book, Silva de Lesion. He realizes the old lists are messy, so he merges the walls of Babylon and the hanging gardens into one slot to make some room. And the lighthouse is in. Now, why fill it with the Lighthouse of Alexandria? This is my idea, it's not source-based, so you know, I'm not giving you an absolute fact here. But look at the year. It's 1540. What was the meta of the 16th century? Navigation. It was the age of discovery. The ocean was the final boss itself. Longitude wasn't even solved yet. We had the chance to be claimed by the ocean itself. So the world didn't need a big structure like the others. They needed a guide that was created for the safety of the mariners. But here's the problem. By the time Pharos made it to the list, it was already gone. And you know, when a legend dies, the lies begin. This text, called Conjuring Up the Wonders, finds it similar to Pinocchio's nose, because just as his nose kept getting longer and longer, the supposed height of Pharos kept getting taller and taller, which is an amazing wordplay. Epiphanes claimed that it was 559 meters tall, and Lucian of Samosata, yes, the one that we talked about, said that it could be seen from 300 miles away. I mean, for that to be true, the Pharos would have to pierce the atmosphere itself. That is fan fiction. It's not real. And it didn't even stop there, you know. Maarten van Heemskerck, in 1553, he paints the self-portrait in front of the Colosseum. And 19 years later, he teams up with the engraver Philip Gall to create these engravings for the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And since he proved his credibility with his Colosseum self-portrait, the world believed in his description of Pharos, but just look at it. It looks like a huge fortress on the mountain, and Alexandria, it has mountains, forests, so it doesn't make any sense. It's a total fabrication. But it doesn't matter, because it's sold. So he managed to create a miracle that was also a mirage. And you know what the sad part about this is? At least in my opinion, Pharos didn't deserve this. I mean, just imagine, you stand tall for 1600 years. I mean, of course, you take some damage, you get modified, but you still survive. And you are a big part of making the prophecy of abundance come true. You provide money, you provide safety for Alexandria, and they only realize your worth after you die. And they make you an impossible tower like you even needed to be one. You know, way to be dramatic, but just hear me out in this, because its light is also another huge controversial topic. Let's get into it. According to Zerefos, the light could be seen from 300 stadia away. Yes, Lucian probably saw the 300 but forgot the stadia part, and then he translated as miles. 300 stadia is 34 miles or 54 kilometers. And this isn't just a mere myth. Modern calculations show that a viewer at 120 meters could see as far as 40 kilometers, but how are we going to cover the rest of the 14? In a cloudless sky, the smoke rising from the fire would be visible long before the fire itself. So Zerefos wasn't lying, he was quite consistent. And to fuel this light, the massive internal rampway is the perfect match here. It was wide enough for horse-drawn carts to haul fuel all the way to the top, which is an amazing logistical operation. But here we go. Problem number 1. A fire that is produced by wood in Egypt? I mean, come on, and to burn timber 24/7, they would soon need to import entire forests like all the way across the sea, and that could lead to bankruptcy. So what do we do here? What can be done? Oils. They were available and they could certainly have been used, but we're gonna have the problem number 2. A fire that is produced by oil will of course produce less light than a huge badass bonfire. So how are we gonna cover that 50-kilometer distance? Enters the room the legendary mirror. Accounts describe it as made of polished Chinese iron or finely wrought glass. And this thing didn't just magnify the light. Legends say that it was used as a telescope as well to observe the approaching ships. I mean, some accounts go beyond ridiculous, by the way, claiming that it could see ships coming all the way from Rome, or it could see what was happening around Constantinople, Istanbul of today.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
But obviously, people who witness technology that they don't understand tend to make things up, which we still do it today. But here's the good news. Euclid was active in Alexandria when Pharos was built. He discovered the principles of optics on concave surfaces. So it is entirely within possibility that the engineers of Alexandria could build a device like this. But of course it still had to work within the limits of the horizon, so sorry, flat earthers. There is one more legend about this that I'm sure you heard. The weapon of Archimedes. A device that is so strong that it could focus the sun's rays and set enemy ships on fire from a distance. So, is this history or is it just another bait for us to fall? And I'm gonna give the short answer. Is it possible? Yes. But is it practical? No. Because it would need to be impossibly massive, and what's more is that sun's destructive energy works best over short distances and on stationary targets. Guess which one the ships have? Yeah, none. But here's the most sensible and actually the coolest explanation that I can give. The light wasn't a laser beam. It was rather a flashbang. Imagine you're a sailor. You're coming back to Alexandria and suddenly a beam of concentrated light hits you in the face. It's blinding. It's terrifying. It feels like Helios is staring right into your soul. So the ships weren't set on fire. They were set on fear. This generated rumors, the legends, and the psychological warfare that eventually led to the lighthouse's ultimate fall. Okay, talk about transition in storytelling. Am I right? No, I'm wrong. Because this is probably another legend that has nothing to do with the facts. The Romans, which today we call them Byzantines, did you know they never called themselves that way? Yeah, you probably did. They were terrified of this amazing mirror and its defensive strength. So they sent a spy, a eunuch to defect the Caliph Al-Walid. He gains his trust by saying that he wants to convert to Islam, and little by little he gets closer to his inner circle. And when he does, he convinces the Caliph that the ancient Greeks buried a treasure underneath the lighthouse. And greed, man's worst enemy, took hold of the Caliph, and he sends his trusting eunuch with soldiers and loyal courtiers. They demolished the lighthouse to half its height and destroyed the mirror. This event enraged the inhabitants of Alexandria because they actually understood that this must be a treacherous ruse. And when the rumors spread and finally arrived at the ears of the Caliph, the spy had already escaped with a boat that he had prepared beforehand. Well, though this is a really good story, the main reason seems to be the seismic activities over the years. This is the textbook part, the reported earthquakes that came with tsunamis and damaged the lighthouse. The great traveler, Ibn Battuta, visited Alexandria in 1326, and he saw only the fragments of the legendary lighthouse. One side of it was gone, destroyed, and when he was returning to Maghreb in 1349, he visited Pharos as well, once again, and it had fallen in such a bad condition that it was impossible to enter it or climb up the doorway. Someone named Al-Malik al-Nasir had started to build a similar lighthouse alongside it, but that was prevented by his death. And thankfully, the story doesn't end there. More than 100 years later, in 1477, Sultan Qait Bey arrived at the site. He saw all the rubble, the remains of Pharos, and instead of clearing out, he realized the opportunity, using the bones of the lighthouse to build a strong fort. And if you go to Alexandria today, you can still see the fort standing there. And an interesting detail is many of the stones of the fort are from the remnants of Pharos, and its measurements closely match the original base of the Pharos. Okay, you know what? I was planning to close the chapter about Pharos with this video because it's already too long, with the rediscovery of its remnants. And while I was researching, I found this, and this. The last one is an official UNESCO report, by the way. And it's one hell of a story with amazing characters and an amazing plot that I can't rest easy putting it to the last 2 minutes of this video. And let me just give you an example. This is Honor Frost, the lady of the anchors, the real-life Lara Croft. And why would I say that? Because she shares her story with us in this book. And an important thing about her is that she likes carrying her oxygen tank almost everywhere, which she calls the bottle. In one of her expeditions, so to speak, she passes through Bodrum and Izmir in Turkey. And because of the political climate here, during that time, a person carrying an oxygen tank would come off as suspicious, and she cannot put it anywhere else, or there could be some explosions. So what does she do? She covers it with 2 blankets with the help of her friends, making it look like a baby. And the guards actually buy it as well. So for 2 days of journey, agonizing and tough days of journey, she and her friend carry that bottle. And I'm not gonna lie, that is the coolest thing I've heard in a while. And she's only one of the people that is involved in this story. So this story gets its own dedicated video next time. And I promise, it's not gonna be another 4 months of waiting. And that is the last of this video. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching. Let me know how I can make this better, and yeah, goodbye.